Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, the World War II era of history is always fascinating, mainly because of the people that were involved there, their sacrifice, their commitment to service, in some cases their tragedy that were involved, and even the technology of those days. Now, I'm going to tell a story here, but I know we have some World War II historians. Katrina has certainly done her work in that area. Don, I know you had done a speech on that, doing some research for one of Tudor's relatives. And we also have some aviation enthusiasts, so this may apply as well. I know, Jason, that's in your area. So as I tell the story, at the end, I'll give all you all an opportunity to guess who I'm talking about. So, my subject person, it all begins in July of 1915, the birth of J.P. Jr. J.P. Jr. was the eldest son of J.P. Sr., who ended up having 9 children. Now, when J.P. Jr. was born, he was certainly not born into poverty, but his father had not yet gotten to a point, was just starting his career in finance, so he wasn't in the lap of luxury yet either. His maternal grandfather, though, was a person of political prominence in the East Coast, had an interesting nickname of Honey Fitz, I should say. And his maternal grandfather was able to get him to all the right prep schools in the New England area and to get into Harvard, where he was on the football team, he was on the crew team, and he was on the rugby team. After graduating from Harvard, next step was Harvard Law. As he got to his second year of Harvard Law, it was 1941. His father had become a diplomat and was known relatively as a pacifist. Did not want the United States getting into what he saw as the looming World War II that was obviously raging in Europe, but did not want the United States involved. But interestingly enough, J.P. Jr. decided to quit law school and join the Navy and join flight school of the Navy, become a naval aviator. Well, he was not a natural pilot, but he did manage to get through naval aviation school. Was first put on it's called a Martin PBM Mariner, which is basically a flying boat, and was doing reconnaissance work off the coast of Puerto Rico. Now that was not really to JP's liking. That's not what he signed up for. He wanted more adventure. So the opportunity came for him a little bit later on, the opportunity to fly what was called the PB-4Y-1, which was the Navy equivalent of the B-24 Liberator. Flying reconnaissance missions, looking for the menace of the U-2 submarines that were menacing shipping in the Atlantic. Now, he completed his 25 missions and was able to go back to the States. But that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted more adventure, but he also wanted to keep up with his now younger brother who had joined the Navy and had begun to outrank him. Now, his younger brother was rather sickly growing up, and JP never thought that his younger brother would actually get in and accepted by the military. But he was through influence of his father. His brother actually had outranked him and had got some notoriety in the Navy. So JP wanted to not be upstaged by his brother. Opportunity came up to volunteer for a mission, a new project that was going on. It was called Aphrodite for the Air Force version, and Anvil for the Navy version. It basically was putting high explosives into these big bombers. In JP's case, it was the B-24 that he had been flying. In the Air Force, or the Army Air Corps at that time, it was putting in B-17s. Flying these remote controlled from a mothership, flying into the targets. Now the targets that they were looking for were the German V-2 rocket installations and facilities. The Allies had tried to bomb those several times, but had really not done enough damage. But these were the V-2 rockets, if you're not familiar with those. First ballistic missiles done by the Germans were doing a lot of damage in London at this time, shooting from the Baltics and from France. So these remote control planes were to take out these installations. The pilots had to fly the planes up, get them to altitude, to the right altitude where the autopilot could be put on, and then the remote control mothership could fly those to the targets. The Air Force had come up, or the Army Air Corps I should say, really needed the pilot to fly the plane, get it to altitude. They would manually switch on the autopilot, manually arm the payload, and then bail out. They were up first. They tried 4 times. None of the planes hit their targets. In fact, there was 1 death involved in one of the pilots, dismemberment of an arm of one of the other pilots as he was ejecting, bailing out of the ship. So now it was the Navy's turn. JP was in his plane flying. The difference that the Navy had was they had really done this a little bit more, had a little bit more technology, and were going to arm the payload and engage the autopilot through the remote control of the mothership. The pilot still had to fly it, get it to the proper altitude, and they were going to monitor the systems and then bail out before leaving the coast of the UK and moving on to the targets in southern France. It was time, JP had gotten that to altitude, it was time for him to radio to the mothership. The mothership said, okay, we will engage the autopilot. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, a huge fireball was seen in the sky. All the chase planes, the mother plane, unfortunately did not see any parachutes, did not see anybody bailing out. A day later, a black limousine was seen coming up to the compound of JP Sr., informing that his eldest son was killed and missing in action. Obviously, the family took that very hard. JP Sr. took it extremely hard, as all his aspirations for his son and the loss of his eldest son were gone. But it's not really the end of the overall story. But let me stop there and ask at this point, anybody know who I'm talking about?
Joseph P. Kennedy, JFK's older
You
brother.
got it. You got it. I thought we might have somebody who would know this. I had some other clues that I was going to use along the way, but you got it, yes. Joseph P. Kennedy, the elder brother of John F. Kennedy, the first son of Joseph Kennedy, diplomat to England at the time of the United States. One other interesting point is the V-2 rocket facilities that he was going to take out. Do you know who the chief Nazi architect was, the chief engineer of those V-2 rocket sites?
Werner von Braun.
Got that. Who? Do you know the other history of Mr. von Braun?
Of course, he actually had a lot to do with the Saturn V rocket as well as the nuclear capability of the Enola Gay.
The Saturn V rocket's the one that took America to the moon, of which JFK had the very speech about that. Now you know the rest of the story. Thank you.